Hey everybody, welcome. Your saltwater guide, Captain Dave Hansen with Captain Bill Varney here, and we got a great show for you today. We're talking surf fishing. I am at the airport flying up for the CCA banquet tomorrow night to honor Dave Pfeiffer. And so it's super loud here at the airport. So what we're going to do is I'm going to stand by in the background as Bill talks to you about surf fishing today and all the great things that are going on the water. But there's a million people here at the airport today, so I'm going to let Bill run the show today. Let's see how he does, everybody. Bill, you got it. Let's do
I'm
this. Welcome.
I'm so nervous. I don't want to fail. I'm not good at failing. So it's good to see
I
you,
got
Dave,
you.
and
I'll watch you.
good to see everybody. And
Thank
I
you,
just
buddy.
wanted to give Dave kudos again for these great live broadcasts that are coming off the Royal Star, 1,000 miles down and 600 miles out to sea. It's just amazing stuff. And hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to get some cameras on some different boats and we can say, hey, let's take a look 1,000 miles down the line. What's going on? Let's go out of Dana Point and take a look what's going on. All of that stuff. It's so great. I just love that. And it's really neat to have an on the water experience. I've always wondered, what is going on down there? And then I would look at, a boat's webpage that night and they'd have maybe some pictures of what was going on. So to be able to have the ability to see in real time what's going on the deck 1,000 miles away is absolutely amazing. So I want to ask everybody if you could just bear with me today. I've got a cold and I've been working on this cold for about a week now. Hopefully it will be gone soon. I've got my fingers crossed at that. So gosh, in the surf fishing world, we've had some really good surf fishing. I mean, it's been phenomenally good for months. And I think so much of that, we talked about this on the weekly game plan, has a lot to do with the fact that the water temperature is warm. It's been warm this whole year. And it has been very moderated. There's been very little lows at going down and very little highs at going up. So that really has moderated the water temperature in the entire California bight from Point Conception all the way to the Mexican border. And that's helped. And then the other thing that's helped is it's really amazing. We've had all of these storms in the last couple of months, and then now they're really piling up in the South Pacific, way down by Antarctica, off of Australia, some a little bit closer off of Chile. And those storms, they originate about 4,000 to 6,000 miles roughly from the California coast. And it's hard to believe that a storm that's rolling around down there can send waves 6,000 miles up to our coast, but they do. And what happens is, as that pushes all of that water north, it pushes warm, clear water with it. I was talking to some folks in Santa Barbara today, doing fish reports down in the South Bay and Orange County. Everybody was saying that they've noticed in the last week or two that this clear water has come into the areas that they fish. So that's really good news. And the thing is, when we look down at the storms down there, we have a progression of back to back to back storms right now. It looks like there's about 5 or 6 in a row. The swells are about 2 to 3 days apart from one another. So it'll fill in, and then the next thing you know, there'll be more swells filling in behind that, and so on and so forth. It doesn't look like the surf is too big from down there, which is good. But another thing that's like so great from down there is not only that warm water, really helping the California bight to turn on at the beach and offshore, but also the swell groups are so far apart from one another. A lot of times we'll see swells like 12, 15, 17 seconds apart. Well, what's going to happen here is we have sets of waves, so 3 to maybe 7 waves, and they'll come in and break, and then there'll be like a, I don't know, 8-minute, maybe even 10-minute break between that and the next set of waves that come in, which is really good for surf fishing because it really churns up the bottom when those big swells come in. And then once it churns up the bottom like that, of course, that makes all that food available. I think all of us, it's so easy for us to forget that fish have no hands. It sounds so dumb. When fish offshore are feeding and they're feeding on bait balls, there's just a big suspended bait ball above them or below them, and they go and eat it. But when they're eating in the surf, they're eating things that are living in the sand. And the only way that those things, the sand crabs and worms and clams, can be exposed is by the surf churning up that bottom. So when those big sets come in, they churn up the bottom like that. And then as it calms down between sets, that's when we cast out. We retrieve our bait slowly across the bottom. It covers all that surface area, and those fish come out of those troughs and holes and feed and wait for the next big group of swells to come in, where they hide away again. So that's really good sign as this water temperature continues to go up, as high as 64 in San Diego and in Orange County in the last couple of days. So keep our fingers crossed that that continues to go on. I see a comment there from Bob. Did you see that they're doing a fly fishing clinic before the Ventura Expo? Yes, I saw that. And Lee Bowerman, one of my good buddies, Fly Fish the Surf is his site. And he ties a lot of the flies that I sell out of my store. He's going to be there, and he's a super knowledgeable person about fly fishing in the surf, probably knows more about it than anybody else. So that should be a great pre-show gathering and a lot to learn there, whether you're a fly angler or you're a spin angler, because of course people like me who are spin angling mostly, when we're using a fly in the surf, we're using the Carolina rig with maybe a 36-inch leader or so on it, and you can take the information from Lee and then apply that to the Carolina rig. It's really great. So that's what's going on out there, and hopefully Dave here will be able to get on his plane here soon and catch his flight to Long Beach and then go to the dinner tonight, which will be great. Checking in over the past couple of days in the surf, over the last week or so, we had a great surf fishing period. We did have it knocked down over a couple of days with those storms that rolled in. But most of you noticed, and I don't know if you saw some of the pictures on social media of guys out there surf fishing, was really calm. There was thunder clouds and rain in the distance, but in general there wasn't a lot of wind associated with that. And although there were counts from Santa Barbara to San Diego, one of my favorites was right out of Carlsbad, where a couple of anglers got 5 right at the steps below South Carlsbad State Beach. They got 5 stripers over 30 inches there. All of them came except for one, which was on a sand crab. The other 4 were on hard baits like a Lucky Craft or a Battle Star. So that's where the stripers were this week. It was really odd. I didn't have a report of, I've gotten them up in Santa Barbara and all the way down to San Diego. They were just down in that San Diego area this week. Not as many reports or so many up in Santa Barbara where we've been seeing them. Talking to the anglers up there, a lot of the anglers had caught a few small sea bass up there this week or so. But the stripers had slowed down, and maybe a lot of that had to do with a lot of these guys said, hey, we decided to go offshore fishing. We went out over to the island or something. We're off the beach. So that fishing for the stripers continues to be good, and it continues to be somewhat spotty. The other big news from down in San Diego was the Corvina, the short fin and the orange mouth Corvina caught down there from shore, and some really big ones, some 30 plus inchers. I know that a lot of those are being caught from shore inside San Diego Bay and really the Back Bay area where Al fishes a lot. There's some really big ones down there. And then the rest have been, one was caught over at Del Mar along the surf there. And here and there, they're making their way out of the harbor and up and down the coast. We really haven't seen any, up in Orange County, and certainly none in Ventura yet. But that doesn't mean that that's not going to happen. In that, the zone of, I would say probably about San Clemente to the border is where we're seeing most of those. And, when we work our way up the coast, of course, Orange County has had some really good surf fishing in the last week or so. Been quite a few of those really big surf perch there. Tons of yellowfin croaker. I don't know if you've ever seen so many yellowfin croaker along the coast. They are from San Diego to Santa Barbara and everywhere in between. So there's a lot of those and some really big ones, 3, 4, 5 pounders down in San Diego this last week were caught down there. But when we make our way up to Orange County, we're looking at like Surfside, Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, that zone in there. It's been good halibut fishing, although no big halibut up there. Once again, quite a few yellowfin croaker and quite a few walleye and barred surf perch. One thing I find kind of interesting is in the springtime now, a lot of times we see spotfin croaker come in Orange County. We really haven't seen those this past week. So hopefully those will fill in as these sand crabs come up to the surface. And then making our way up in that Hermosa, Manhattan, Redondo, that Rat Beach right after Torrance area, Torrance Beach area, all that. It was a little bit slower this week. Hermosa kicked out a couple of nice halibut, 26 and a 30-incher out of there. Once again, on Lucky Craft baits there. And then, that zone that we've seen from really the Santa Monica Pier all the way to that Venice Beach area has had some really big barred surf perch in there. Those really started coming in a month and a half ago after this Grunion run happened, and that has been good. And then the news there is these big yellowfin croaker that have been there, and I'm really surprised in the last couple of weeks we haven't seen any striper up in that zone, which is really well known for that. But really, that Hermosa Manhattan zone has had some smaller palm-side bar surf perch, some walleye surf perch, and then, like I said, those halibut on Lucky Craft. A couple of years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, the biggest halibut I've ever seen caught in the surf, almost 40 pounds, was caught right to would be the Palos Verdes side or the south side of the Hermosa Pier using a Lucky Craft in that low tide going to high tide in the afternoon. So that is still something that's happening, and that's a great place to look. Anywhere along the South Bay and really all the beaches where you have piers which have structure, or you have jetties that have structure right on the edges of that sand structure area is where you're going to find those halibut. So keep your eyes open for those. And then, when we work our way up to Ventura fishing been really good all along the Oxnard shores, Hollywood Beach, the Ventura jetties, lots of big barred perch being kicked out there. Once again, didn't see any striper up there this week, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be up there next week. And then quite a few halibut up there caught, 3 or 4 just in the last week. 128-incher once again caught on that blue sardine Battle Star bait. So that's good. And then when we make our way up to Santa Barbara, as I said, there wasn't so many striper caught up there or really even seen. There wasn't any Corbina caught or seen up in that zone. But there were quite a few small white sea bass under 20 inches caught from shore on those hard baits. And then along with that, down around places like graveyards and then up above in Hope Ranch, there has been a pretty decent bite up in those areas on halibut, especially on white baits like a white fluke, a white drop shot, white swim baits, and then those two-tone hard baits where it's a brighter color on top and a lighter color on the bottom. All of those have been doing really, really well in that Santa Barbara area. The Graveyards area, of course, is south, which is kind of funny, of East Beach, a little bit below East Beach. And then Hope Ranch is up above the Santa Barbara Harbor there, all the way up to Gaviota. Has there been spots on and off for halibut up in those areas? So that's really what we've been looking at along the beach in the last, I'd say, week or so down there. And it's all of this fishing is going to get better as we get into next week, as the water temperature warms up. And once again, more of this warm water comes up from the south from those swells coming up from there. So let me know if anybody's got any questions. I see that so Rick is telling me that diving in 3 to 7 foot visibility. I know one of the things that It comes and goes with this wind and with this current. The other thing that we always have to deal with is the kelp and the eelgrass in the water, and that has areas where it concentrates very thick, and then areas where it's not as thick. So we look for those in between areas. A lot of times when I'm fishing places like Santa Barbara and San Diego, where I can go up on the cliff and I see that the water is dirty, I go up in the cliff before I go down and fish, and I look along and I try to find out kind of where the kelp and the eelgrass end and clear water begins. And it might just be an area that can be 10 or 15 feet wide, is all. And then on both sides of it, it's very, very dirty. But I'll look up from the cliffs and find that I'll line that up with the tower that's near it. So let's say tower number 32, lifeguard tower. And then I'll go down and I'll line myself up in the tower and fish right in front of it, or something along the beach where I can see the water is cleaner there. That's really the only way around it, other than just casting, retrieving, cleaning off your lure, and moving on till you find the right spot. It's really hard. So that water will get dirty and clean. We'll have a little red tide here and there, but all in all, it's really making its way back and looking good. So super, that's good to see, Jason. Super clear water at Del Mar. And yeah, watch for the water conditions off of the webcams, which is what I do also, and give you a really good idea, especially when the sun is out. You can get a good idea of certainly how clear the water is. Have you ever seen in shallow water great whites? The only great whites I've actually seen are the ones that I see by video. Excuse me, that the lifeguards in particular in that Huntington Beach, Seal Beach, Surfside area, which are right in the outside surf line. And those fish, those white sharks, they're normally, I would guess, probably about 5 feet. They're all juveniles. I've never seen a really big one in the surf, with the exception of a huge one I saw a video of that came in, was hooked, fought, and brought into the surf at Camp Pendleton. That was about 11 feet long, that they turned around and pushed out there. So crazy stuff. But just excuse me, just a couple of questions here. Does the domoic acid flush out of the fish? Filter organisms like clams and mussels, that's where the domoic acid is really dangerous, or more dangerous for humans. I don't know if anybody who doesn't have some type of physical issues would get sick and die from it, but would certainly give you an upset stomach if you get it in the clams and you get it in the mussels. As far as fish are concerned, I really don't see it affecting the fish as far as their meat is concerned. And that's one thing that we see when we see the domoic acid have its effect on sea lions, seals, occasionally porpoise, dolphins, whales. It attacks their brain. It's almost like brain wasting disease, which is what we see in the elk and the deer in both California and places like here in Colorado. It affects their brain, but if you were to shoot one and harvest it, it wouldn't affect their meat. So I've never really heard of, excuse me, that is a problem. And hopefully it will not get worse and really become a problem. And then, why are zebra perch so rare compared to barred surf perch? Well, one of the reasons is, I would guess, is that they don't produce or spawn as prolifically the zebra perch or striped sea perch as you're going to find a barred surf perch. Barred surf perch, the biomass is unbelievable. And the thing about those barred surf perch is they can live in a multitude of environments. They can live in the troughs or the holes on open beaches where there's just sand, and feed off the sand crabs there. They can live in or near rocks where they back into those big rocks and live in the rocks and then come out and feed. There's so many different places they can live. So the zebra surf perch, you're right. There are so few of those, so many less of those. We often find those and catch those and sargo near rocky or structure areas, but there is occasionally where you do find them on the open beach too. Happy Wednesday to everybody. Happy Okuma Wednesday. And then I'd love to check back in with Dave, if we could, for a second to see how he's doing in the airport there and if he's going to get on a plane here soon. I'm going to be going down in about 3 weeks to the East Cape to go fishing down there. So I'll be checking in on Wednesday with a fish report right from the beach there at the East Cape there at Playa del Sol. Beautiful beach, beautiful area down there. I will have to take the day off fishing that day for the midday fishing. I'll only be able to do morning and afternoon. But you know what's really funny down there is that, and it's such a beautiful place there. We'll go out and we'll sit on the beach in the evening, you know, kind of in the late afternoon, getting close to the evening. And there's quite a few folks who you know, Canadians and Americans who live down there. And I think they kind of hang out at their house all day from the beach. You don't really see anybody down on the beach, laying on the beach in Mexico so much. And then all of a sudden, probably about 45 minutes before the sun goes down, you'll see like 10 or 12 off-road vehicles, you know, whether they're forerunners or motorcycles or whatever, and they'll all show up with their 10 and 12-foot rods on the beach. And for like that 45 minutes or an hour, they'll kind of line up. There's two big points that go out there, and the boats anchor right off there. And when those boats anchor off there, they drop off their crew and also their passengers, and then they anchor out there. They throw a lot of their bait out at the end of the day. That will bring in Dorado, you know, rooster fish, pargo, everything right in there. And so all these folks who live there, for about an hour before sunset every day of the week, they'll come right down to the edge of the water. There'll be like 10 or 15 guys casting like crazy out there. You'll see the fish boiling. You know, I'll be up against them trying to get my lures out there as far as I can. They may hook one or two, bring them in for dinner, and then the bite's over. As soon as the sun goes down, the bite's over. Everybody gets on their ATVs and goes home. It's really quite interesting to watch. So looking forward to that. That's going to happen in just a couple of weeks or so. When we're looking at some of the questions, one is love the picture of my dog. I put a picture of my dog up there when it was sitting out on the snow in the backyard here. Our snow is melting away now. It's really interesting how the snow works up here in the Rockies. When I first moved here, and we had, you know, like 8 to 10 feet of snow on the ground in our yard. And then, of course, you look out from our yard, there's miles and miles of mountains around.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes, Dave.
We're going to take a break for 1 second
Okay.
and show this little video from Okuma, and then we'll get right back
All right,
at it.
sounds
You're
good.
doing a great job. Don't be nervous.
I can blow my nose. Where are you going, Hazel? Where are you going?
This is a reintroduction of the Komodo series. What we've done is we've upgraded the pinion gear from brass. This is a reintroduction of the Komodo series. What we've done is we've upgraded the pinion gear from brass to stainless steel. Still features a stainless steel main gear. All new cosmetics that you'll see, there's no red accents like previous. Now it'll match any rod out there in the market that you use. The 350 will come with 6 high-performance ball bearings. The 450 will come with 7 high-performance ball bearings. The carbon fiber drag system outputs 25 pounds of drag pressure on 350 sizes. When you get to the 450, you'll output 30 pounds of drag pressure. Huge amount of drag for this type of reel. And when you get to the 350, we have a 6.4 to 1 gear ratio, 31 inches of line pickup. On the 450 size, we'll offer 2 different gear ratio options, a 6.3 to 1 gear ratio with 33.5 inches of line pickup, as well as a 7.1 to 1 gear ratio with 37.7. We're gonna offer 2 different handle options. We have the paddle handle like the one in my right hand, as well as a power handle in my left hand. We can offer that in every model, both the 350 and the 450.
All right, gang, the QR code's up on the bottom of the screen. Go check out that Komodo series reel. Bill, back to you. Where are you, Bill?
I'm back. I had to get some
There he is.
props.
On his way. All
Had to
right,
get my props.
go. You're
So
back
anyway, I was
on.
just saying, I love that Okuma reel. Actually, I've got a couple of them right here next to me, and I'll be using them out in the freshwater here tomorrow. But I just was talking about how that we got this snow up here. So, you know, we moved up here, and we had 10 feet of snow on the ground in our yard. And as I said, when you look out the window from my office here, there is miles of mountains with 10 feet of snow everywhere. And I was really worried, to be honest with you, about when it warms up and it all melts, like where does it go? And is there mud everywhere? And does it wash your neighbor's house away and all this stuff? And what I learned, which is so interesting, is up here in the mountains at, excuse me, at 10,000 feet, more snow evaporates than it melts. So you'll have this giant pile in your yard, let's say, and then an area of dirt next to it. And the dirt isn't even wet around the snow because it literally evaporates off the top of the snow. And you have probably 7 months of snow on the ground. And then all of a sudden, in about a 2 or 3 week period, all of a sudden one day, it's all gone. It's really amazing, that many feet. And then you'll start seeing the forest grow. There's so many wildflowers up here. It'll begin to grow. And because it has such a short season, at 10,000 feet, there's only about 60 or 61 days a year where it doesn't get below freezing. So it has a very short period to grow. So what will happen is you'll look out the window today and the grass, or, you know, the weeds or the wildflowers or whatever's growing out there will be an inch high, and you'll look out there tomorrow, you can literally see it grow. It'll be 2 inches, 3 inches. A week later, it'll be a foot tall. It's really amazing. Everything is sped up here in the mountains. So it's really quite a different thing to get used to, but really, really beautiful, of course, at the same time. So when I go down to, when I travel to places like Cedros Island, the East Cape, I was in Aruba not too long ago, Fiji, Hawaii, all over the world, different places that I go surf fishing. I have to take a travel rod with me, and travel rods are really hard to find a decent one that is small enough to fit in your bag. Don't want to carry it separately if you can. So I like to use these Okuma SST rods. And here's an example of one of them. This is the medium light rod. They come in these hard containers. I don't carry it in the container myself. I take the rod out of there, actually put it in my suitcase so I don't have this to carry along with me. But this is something really nice to keep them in, because afterwards, you got them in the garage or whatever, you don't want them to get dirty. And because they're so small, they can be easily, something dropped on them or broken. So it's got a little zipper top here. We unzip it here. And then, as I said, there are 4 different there's like I think a medium light, a light, and a medium heavy, and a heavy. So maybe there's 3 or 4. And as I said, this one is just a 3-piece rod, cork handle, very easy to put together. Match this up with a 3,000 or 4,000 size spinning reel. When I'm fishing on the East Cape, for example, I'm usually fishing 12-pound test monofilament over there. And then when we go over on the west side, so we're fishing in the Pacific, and that would be with Cabo Surfcaster West, for example, we're going to use a completely different rod. And they do make the SST in a heavy, that's 10.5 feet, but we're going to fish these 10 to 12 foot rods on the west side. And that's what's, one of the things about down fishing around Dave's house that's so unusual is that when you're fishing on the East Cape, so in the Sea of Cortez, plenty of big fish in there. I've got a 35-pound yellowfin tuna right from the beach there. But you can fish like 12-pound tests. You don't have a lot of surf going in there. You don't have much surge going in there. Fish are, in general, somewhat smaller over there. And then when you're fishing On the west side, so in the Pacific Ocean side, so that would be from Cabo Falso, so that's the point where Cabo San Lucas is, up toward California from there. That's on the Pacific coast side. Much bigger fish there, much stronger fish there, a lot of rock structure and other things that they can take you into. And that's why we're fishing a 10 to 12 foot rod. We're matching that up with a 6,000 or 60 size reel, spinning reel. And we're fishing somewhere between 60 and 100 pound braid on that. And then to that, we're going to have a main line. And depending on where we're fishing, our main line going to where a lure is either going to be 80 pound to maybe even 200 pound on some of the areas that we fish along the coast there, because there's a lot of big grouper there. And those grouper are going to take you right into the rocks. And if they do, and you're not fishing heavy enough line, they're going to break you off instantly. When you're fishing on the other side, straight behind you on the East Cape side, once again, it's very calm in there. And because there's not so much structure, very little structure on that side, you have a real good chance, as long as you have plenty of monofilament or plenty of backing that's braid, to fight those fish, tire them out, and get those big fish into shore. Much easier to catch a rooster fish on the East Cape and land it than it is to land it on the Pacific side. So these are some of the different rods that we use when we're traveling, and they're great to have. Okuma has a whole line of those. If you do decide to buy one, you have a question about any of those, let me know. I'll be able to give you all the information I can about those, whether it's conventional or spinning. Here's a question. That's a good question too. When I travel to other countries, how do I know if it's legal to fish? That's such a good question. And what's really interesting about that is that different places that you go, different countries that you go to, and different places that you go within those countries may have different rules themselves. Like, for example, when you go to Aruba. So Aruba, which is right off the Venezuelan coast, really good bonefish fishing on the shore. Of course, you're not going to keep bonefish. You're just going to go fishing for those. Water's super clear there. The sand in the bottom there is like white sand. So when you look out in the water, it really looks like a swimming pool. It's really beautiful there. But when you go fishing offshore there, they have exceptionally good fishing there for wahoo, blackfin tuna, Dorado. As a matter of fact, when I went fishing there last time, the first day we went fishing, we got wahoo, Dorado, and blackfin tuna in like an hour. There were so many of them. But the thing is unlike Mexico, you can't have them processed there and take them. They don't allow you to remove anything from the island or from around the island. So what I do is I research everywhere I go and figure out what the rules and regulations are. So let's take Mexico, for example. In Mexico, you need a fishing license to fish from a boat, but you're not required to have one to fish from shore. I've never been checked on shore for a fishing license. I've definitely been checked out in our boat, whether it was at Mag Bay or all the way down to Cabo. But I've never been checked on the beach there. So what do? Well, a license in Mexico is good, like the California licenses now, from the day that you buy it a year henceforth. It doesn't expire prior to that. I know I'm going to go fishing other places in Mexico. And just to be safe, I buy my license for Mexico and I do carry it with me when I'm on the beach, although it is not required by law. I want to have it just in case something changes. Other places like Hawaii, for example, Hawaii doesn't require a fishing license at all if you fish in the ocean. So if you live in Hawaii and you fish on the beach or you go out in a boat and fish, no fishing license is required. But if you fish inshore on any of the inshore lakes in Hawaii, and there's really good fishing in inshore lakes in Hawaii, although they're not known for their trout so much, they are known for large and smallmouth bass over there. I believe there's some peacock bass over there too. You are required, if you're fishing in a lake or a stream, a creek in Hawaii, to have a fishing license inland. So everywhere that I go to, I look in advance at what their rules and regulations are. I try to figure them out to the best of my ability, and I get a license for there. Last year, I think I purchased 7 different fishing licenses. So I had like California, Nevada, I fished in Utah, Colorado, Mexico, um, and where else? So I spent a lot of money on licenses last year, and kudos to all those places. I hope the money's going for their environment for sure and making fishing better there. And then I saw another question about like what is one of my favorite fish to eat from the beach in surf fishing. Well, all the surf fish are good. I mean, you think of most of the surf fish, I think the exception, and not so much a surf fish, but in the surf environment, would be like an opali. There are certain fish like opali, for example, and mullet that eat moss, and they taste like moss. They're terrible. But most of the other fish, bards, surf perch, walleye, surf perch, corbina, yellowfin croaker, spotfin croaker, halibut, all of those fish eat sand crabs, clams, and worms. Can you imagine having a steer in your yard that you had fed shrimp for 5 years before you ate it? It would taste so good. So all of those fish in the surf taste really good. The only fish they taste good, but the only fish I like to stay away from is the perch, because the perch are so bony. They're very, very bony fish. And so it's a lot like a trout, where once you cook it, it takes some time to eat it. Whereas fish that you can make a fillet out of, it's a big difference there. So when you look at the surf and you look at something like a corbina or a croaker, like a spot fin or a yellowfin croaker, these are all in the white sea bass family. They've been eating sand crabs, clams, and worms their whole life. Delicious meat in all of those fish. And then, of course, sea bass, white sea bass, delicious. And then, of course, halibut. And that's the thing about halibut. I don't think there's ever been a legal halibut that I've caught in the surf that I've thrown back. I think I've always kept it. But there's been many, 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 if not thousands of corbina, spotfin croaker, yellowfin croaker, perch that, of course, I've thrown back. So I really like to, stay in that halibut, sea bass. Occasionally I have a perch that we'll cook the whole thing. It'll be delicious, but we'll have to deal with the bones there. And then, yeah, people always ask, how do you catch those mullet, those jumping mullet we see in the harbors? And a lot of times we'll see those up in the LA River area, the Los Alamitos Bay area. You'll see those mullet in the Santa Ana River and so forth. Those mullet, they generally eat moss. They're very, very difficult to catch on a hook and a line. And unfortunately, the people that generally do go up there and catch them are snagging them, or they're going to use a sinker on the very end of their line, and then 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, who knows, treble hooks, and they'll cast out, retrieves, pull it to the side, retrieve, pull when they're trying to snag those mullet. That is against the law. There's really nobody out there to enforce it, but that's about the only way, unless you're going to get those mullet in a net to catch those mullet. And man, I would love to have a tank of those mullet going out, not only under the kelp patties for yellowtail and dorado and maybe tuna, but marlin fishing. And I would imagine swordfish, got a swordfish floating up on the surface, sunning itself, getting upwind of that thing, casting down onto it with one of those mullet. I know that would work. That would be phenomenal. And then Brent says, I love to eat those smaller halibut. Those are called sand dabs because we can't eat the small ones. But yeah, I really, we talk about different sizes of fish for eating. Last year I was down in Cedros, and there's a really good bite on what they call grouper down there, what we call black sea bass in California, protected black sea bass. They're just a nuisance. There's so many of them. And I had the chance of having a bite of a fillet from one that was, like 100-pounder. And then I had fillets from one that was about a 30-pounder. And the big one was tough. It was chewy. It wasn't good at all. and that smaller fish was much better to eat. And that's really the same that we see with halibut also. You know, I know these halibut up in Alaska, it's a different halibut, of course, up there than the California halibut, but those ones that are really, really big, those 150, 250 pounders, the meat is definitely not going to be as good as the smaller ones. So those halibut that are in that legal range, that 22 inches to maybe like 35-inch range, those are really the best eating ones for sure. So let's see, what else do we have here? What other great questions do we have? Yeah, and halibut always do look bigger underwater. You know, I told that story last week about how my dad and my uncle, my grandma would send my dad and his brother to the Hermosa Pier in 1930s, around 35, 37, and say, hey, I want you guys to go out to the pier and bring me home a halibut. The water was so clear back in those days that you could see the halibut laying right on the bottom, and you could literally walk around the pier till you saw the one you wanted and then cast to it and try to catch that fish. And I know there were more times than not where him and Uncle Pete looked off the pier down that water and it looked like there was a 40-pound halibut. And when they got it up to the surface, maybe it was about half that big. So everything looks bigger underwater for sure. There's no question about that for sure. See if there's any other interesting questions here. Oh gosh. So that's about it on that level. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about today was a little bit about our game plan and how we put that together, what we look for, all of us as captains, and how we put it on there. You know, for surf fishing, I'm always looking for conditions. People will often say like, "Hey, give me your spots. You know, give me your favorite spots. What's a good spot in Orange County to go surf fishing?" Well, every beach along every coast, everywhere in the world has good surf fishing. The question is are the conditions right? And where are the conditions occurring on that beach? So that's one thing that we go over, of course, we talk about in great depth on the videos and the articles and things like that. But also that's something that's just so important is the conditions where you can walk down to the edge of the beach, specifically a beach you've never been on before, look up and down the beach, and you can tell by certain conditions that are occurring out in the water that that's where the fish are going to be. So that is something that you learn in the game plan that's really important to know. One really good example of that would be if I was to walk down on the edge of the sand and I'm looking out on the water, let's say there's a little rise there, so I'm above the water and I can look up and down the beach, and I see an area where the water is off colored, foaming, maybe going in a circular type of shape. I know that that's a rip current. I know that that rip current is occurring there. It may move. It may last 2 minutes there. It may last 2 days there. But what I know is that that rip current is churning up the bottom for me. And when it's churning up the bottom, it's bringing up all those clams and crabs and worms, and fish are congregating in that area. They're hearing that sound underwater, this disturbance off in the distance, and they're making that way to that disturbance because they know that it's churning up the bottom. And when it churns up the bottom, it churns up the food. So when I go to a lake, I look out at the lake and it's always very, very calm. The water's really clear. And although I'll look for areas where maybe a creek's coming in and there's some water movement, freshwater fish are very different than saltwater fish that are always looking for that constant water movement that's churning their food up off the bottom. So if I go and I look down the water, it looks calm, and then I see 100 yards down in front of tower number 2, the water is off colored, foaming, bubbly. I know that's the place to go. I run down the beach. I set myself up in front of that tower that I used as a permanent mark behind me, and I fish right there. So conditions are really important. And once you get better at recognizing the conditions, you can go to basically any beach in the world and catch fish. And then bait wise, you know, we talk about bait in the surf. And what's interesting about surf fishing bait is, of course, you've got all the lure category side, and then you've got all the live bait category side. And there's two ways of really fishing those two types of baits specifically. when you're looking at lures, you can really fish both a spinning rod outfit and a conventional outfit. I prefer a conventional outfit myself when I'm fishing like a Lucky Craft, Battle Star, those hard baits, or I'm fishing something like a Castmaster Crocodile, one of those type of baits. I'm going to most likely fish a conventional outfit with a bait casting reel. I'm normally fishing 12-pound monofilament. If I'm overseas, I'll usually have a backing of probably 30-pound braid on that and then mono on top of that. And the reason I'm fishing that is because I'm going to be making dozens, if not 100 or more casts. And I'm going to be casting my rod as hard as I can throw that rod. When I have live bait on there and it's swinging on the Carolina rig, I'm not making a cast like that. I'm trying to fish fairly close to shore. When I'm using a lure, I'm not trying to fish far from shore. I'm just trying to cover as much surface area as possible. So I might use a spinning outfit, but likely I'm going to use a conventional outfit. And then when I'm fishing bait, I'm always going to use a spinning outfit. It's going to give me the ability to cast short distances and be accurate if I need to. So if I'm walking along the beach, I'm hunting for a corbina. I see a corbina out here in front of me. It's 20 feet off the sand. It's in 2 feet of water. I want to be able to cast right in front of it in the angle that it's going to, so I can get my bait, my sand crab, right in front of it. And that surf rod, that's a spinning rod, is going to give me more accuracy to get that bait right in front of that corbina. So I really like to use both of those. And that's kind of the baits that the techniques that we're going to use and the rods that we're going to use for those different baits in the surf. And of course, in the live bait world, we have all kinds of live bait choices there. We have sand crabs and worms like lugworms, bloodworms. There's over 3,000 worms that occur naturally in the marine environment around the world. So you'll find worms all over the world that you can use for bait. And then you'll use things like cut anchovies or whole anchovies or sardine, grunion that we've saved from the grunion runs, all of those different things. And we'll present those more times than not on the Carolina rig. Let's see what else tastes like chicken. That's right. I know. We'll come to Palau and fish on the reefs and the beaches. Okay, one of my best buddies, unfortunately, I'm really sad to say, he passed away about a month ago. He was in the Coast Guard, and he was right after the Vietnam War. And he was stationed in Palau, and that was where he met his wife. They got married, and they just recently, they live now. As I said, he passed away a month ago, but his wife and the kids, they live in New Mexico now. They lived in Hawaii for many years. But he would tell me all kinds of stories about Palau and how good the fishing was. He would tell me how women, and it may have changed now, were not allowed to be on boats there. They were bad luck. And so the women what would happen is the men would take the boats out, can't remember the name of the boats that they would use there. They would take the boats out to sea and fish. And then when they would come in fairly close to shore, the women would swim out to the boats and greet them, which was good luck. And they would come back into shore. They take all the fish out of the boats, and then they would really divide them up evenly among the people in the village. He also told me that when they got to the island there, Palau, so he was probably there about 1970, 71. So he first got there. A lot of people on the island were smoking marijuana, which he was really surprised about until he learned that it was brought to them by the peacekeeping organization that came to help them and take over the island. So I thought that was interesting that it was introduced to them. And then another thing that I learned from him on Palau that was really interesting was in these, I guess they're kind of like a teepee, that women would be sequestered in these teepees for 3 or 4 days during the month, and they would not be bothered, and food would be brought to them. And then when that period of time was over for them, they would go back in and be part of the village again. So anyway, very interesting. I'd love to go to Palau and fish there and anywhere down there in the South Pacific for sure. So somebody asked, what does the acronym RAT beach stand for? Rat Beach. When we were kids growing up, and hanging out down at Rat Beach, which is it. There's there's Redondo, Torrance Beach, which is a little sliver of the town of Torrance, has a little beach area, and then a little beach, and then Palos Verdes. And so that was known as Rat Beach. Well, we thought for years that it must be because there's so many rats living in there's like a cliff that goes up behind it, and it's has flora on it, has plants and stuff on it, and we assumed that there were obviously rats living up there. We thought at night the rats must come down on the beach. We thought that was the reason. We thought that the reason that it was named Rat Beach was because there was this pinnacle that was made out of calcium, this calcium pinnacle that stuck up in the cliff, and everything had eroded around it, and then it was this pinnacle, and you could climb up there and you could look out of there. And we had seen mouse droppings up there, so we thought, well, maybe that was the reason that it was called Rat Beach. And then one day when we finally paid attention in high school, I think it came to us that it was an acronym that stood for Right After Torrance, RAT, Right After Torrance. So I think that's what it is. I don't think that is that there's rats there. Oh yeah, beetle nut in Palau. Yeah, my buddy's wife, she would chew that all the time. And one of the first times we met him, he was stationed there, and then they moved him, of all places. He wanted to come back to California. He was really lucky. He got stationed in Newport Harbor at the Coast Guard dock there. I met his wife there for the first time, and I was with my buddy. And when we walked away, I said, what in the world is up with her teeth? Because all of her teeth were just like bright brownish black, and it's from chewing the beetle nut, which is common on the island there, a lot like caffeine in coffee. Yes, so RAT does stand for Right After Torrance. I think that's what it is. We as people growing up there, families, we talked about it for years. Any good tips for the Carlsbad Lagoon? The Carlsbad Lagoon is interesting. It can be off and on. It's had times where it's had extremely good spot fin croaker fishing right inside the lagoon there, right next to the highway, Pacific Highway there. And then other times it's been really good on the outside of the lagoon when the water is rushing out, going from a high tide to a low tide. I think most often I would fish in the lagoon on a medium, so low tide going to high tide. So wait till we're at the medium tide part, coming up to a high tide, particularly a time where we have an astronomical tide. We've got, a 5.5 to maybe 8 foot tidal swing from low tide to high tide, because that's going to create a lot of current inside of that lagoon. And the thing is that you want to be in areas in the lagoon where the current is going to be at its strongest, and you want to look for where it's wrapping around corners, creating eddy circulations there. What that will do is that will bring air and food in, and fish are lazy by nature. They'll sit along that edge of those rocks, and when that water comes in at that high tide along those rocks and spins around like this, they'll be coming out and feeding those areas. That's what I would look for. I would not fish in areas in the lagoon where it's really calm, unless I'm looking for areas that maybe will have halibut or something like that in them. But as far as all of the spot fin, yellowfin, croaker, most of the halibut, so forth, they're going to be looking for where the water is really moving there inside the lagoon. And the best time for that, once again, would be at these astronomical tide periods. That's around the new moon and the full moon, when the water is coming from low tide up to high tide. Also, if I'm fishing those areas, and this is true all along the beach and in lagoons and bays and so forth, is that when there's a full moon, there's a very good likelihood that fish that you're fishing for are feeding at night. So the morning is going to be slow. They're going to be hungry in the afternoon. So on full moon nights and full moon periods, so 4 or 5 days in there where the moon's really full, I'm fishing in the afternoon. In new moon periods where there's no moon and it's very dark at night, Most of the fish are all hiding at night, because what happens at fish at night is that when there's a moon and there's a bait fish or a fish swimming, it creates a shadow that's coming off of that moon, and it projects that shadow below it toward the bottom. That's what fish see. When you have a new moon period and there's no moon at all, no moon whatsoever, it does not create a shadow very easily, and it's difficult for them to see. So when I have a new moon period where it's very dark at night, first thing in the morning, fishing is really good in the bays and the beaches, slower in the afternoon. When we have a full moon where it's really bright at night, fishing is predominantly better later in the afternoon. And if you pay attention to that in the moon phase, you'll notice that not only is that true in the bays and the harbors and at the beach, but often offshore when we're fishing for things like yellowfin and bluefin tuna and white sea bass and all kinds of other fish, yellowtail. The fishing is better in the afternoon when we have a full moon period. Gosh, let's see. Some great questions here. When do you know when it is best to use a plastic over a sand flea or sand crab for surf fishing? Is it based on clouds and weather? That's a good question. First of all, the sand crab thing. This is the thing about the sand crabs. In Southern California, they're seasonal. Surffish love sand crabs. Prior to us throwing out grubs and lures in the water, all they had was worms that they could occasionally catch, clams that would occasionally get dug up by waves, and then the sand crabs that were prolific. So sand crabs are always there. And what happens is when the water gets to 60 degrees or warmer, the sand crabs come up to the surface in Southern California. When the water temperature goes over 62 degrees, they begin to lose their shells. And at the same time, they begin to spawn and have all their eggs, those orange eggs, when you turn them over and look at the bottom of them. Those eggs have a particularly strong odor. And when the next time you go down to the beach, grab some sand crabs this summer and put them in a little cup and let them sit in there for a couple of minutes, and then take a sniff in there, and you'll be able to smell what those eggs smell like. Well, what will happen is those eggs will spread out on the beach with the sand crabs by the billions. And that odor will just drive the surffish crazy, and they'll want to go right after those sand crabs. When there's less sand crabs in the water, so that would be before May, after October 1st, then things like artificial lures become more active and work better in the surf, because surf fish often feed on the small, when they're not getting the sand crabs and worms and crabs, they're eating the small fry that are born from the barred surf perch and the walleye surf perch and so forth. They're eating all of those, their small fish as they grow. That's going to be one of their favorite foods to eat. So I use both interchangeably. I will use grubs, lures like Castmasters, crocodiles, all those in the surf in the winter when I know there's really no natural baits out there. But I'll also use those lures in the summertime when I'm targeting specific fish like halibut, sea bass, and striper. I'm definitely not going to use a lure in most cases when I'm fishing for corbina, spotfin croaker, yellowfin croaker, fish like that.
Hey, Bill.
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay, it's time. We got to wrap this up. I got to get on the airplane. You did a phenomenal job. Everybody, listen, I want a big announcement. Tomorrow, I am going to be at the CCA dinner tomorrow night, but I'm going to get there about half an hour, 45 minutes early, and we're going to do our live podcast from the CCA dinner. You're going to get to meet the who's who of the industry. They're going to come in one at a time, say hi to everybody, and thank you all for all the support. Bill, you did an excellent job today. I'm proud
Thank you,
of you.
Dave. Thank you.
Go blow your nose.
I know. Gotta blow my nose soon.
Gang, it'll be really exciting. I'll be on at 5:30 tomorrow night. That's when we're going to do the show, because I want to bring in all the CCA guys and let them see what a phenomenal show we're doing here. Everybody plan on being on around 5:30 tomorrow night. The party starts at 6, so we'll go live for a bunch of guests, and then tomorrow at 5:30. All right? Bill, great job.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
great.
Everybody, thank you. Okuma,
Thank
thank
you.
you for all your support. I'll see all the guys from Okuma tomorrow night. Bill, I'll put in the word for you. I know you can't make it. You got
Thank you.
prior engagements, but I know you're going to be there in spirit. So thank you, everybody, for supporting CCA and supporting me and Bill. And check out Bill's game plans, gang. I had the QR code up there for quite a while today. Grab that QR code. If you enjoyed what Bill was saying today, you get all of that over at Bill's Bundles at our website, yoursaltwaterguide.com. QR code's right there. Bill and I will give you 7 free days to check it out and see if it's even worth it. But I guarantee you, once you look, you can't leave.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to say one last thing. Tim, I saw your question about what I like to use in the streams and the lakes and the rivers here. And we'll try to cover that next week. I'm going to do my best, if the weather is nice, to be out in my boat in the lake, and we'll try to send a signal right from there.
Beautiful. I got to go get in
All
line.
right.